Okay, let's talk about diversity and inclusion. And again, this is one of those topics that for me, I thought I had a handle on, and then certainly in preparation for this event and in conversation with our panelists here today, I realized I actually knew very little about. And so what our aim is to do today is to involve everyone here in a conversation about what diversity and inclusion really are, why they matter, the impact that they can have on your business, how to activate programs that consider the individual, the group, the collective, the business, and then how to really measure ROIs. So I'd like to welcome our panel, and we'll begin from my left, Jean-Pierre. And the way we're going to do this is that rather than me reading their bio, they'll tell you a little bit about themselves and hopefully why they're excited to be here. So we'll begin with Jean-Pierre Fernandez from Ryerson University.
Hi, everyone. You can hear me. My name is Jean-Pierre. As David said, I work with Ryerson University. So I'm really excited to be here because this is a large part of the work that we're doing at Ryerson. It's embedded in all of our policies. It comes from the top down for us, and so we're encouraged to ensure that diversity and inclusion is really a part of the daily work that we're doing. So when we can talk about that and share that, we're really excited to do so. My role more specifically is working with the Career Center. I work with employers, so I'm more external facing to bring employers onto campus. And a part of what I do with that is help educate employers about diversity and inclusion, how their policies and practices impact our students and impact our students as future employees of their organization. So that's sort of a small snippet of what I do.
Hi. Oh, no, you can take mine.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Sarah Saska. So I come to this work first through being sort of a social justice baby for the majority of my life, being raised by feminist parents. And then I sort of shifted into it through the academic perspective. So my doctoral research focused on sort of how deep diversity lenses bring so much value and are actually just critical to innovation processes and different types of technologies. So about 4 years ago, actually, yeah, we just turned 4, myself and my co-founder launched our consultancy called Feminuity. So we work with companies around the globe. We're pretty industry agnostic, and we build out diversity, inclusion, and belonging strategies for companies. So we're still a pretty nimble team. We're about 33 across about 6 countries at this point. And for us, every day is just a learning and a growing. And we really love to be in this space, but we're kind of a no bullshit shop. We work with people that we want to work with. We don't work with folks who, maybe just want us to come and sort of de-risk them so they don't become the next Uber. We're only invested in working with people who their hearts are in the right place, their minds are enough in the right place, and we feel that we can actually bring some value and sort of move the needle with.
Last but not least.
Good morning, everyone. Ali Najafi from RBC. Pleasure to be here this morning and see such a vibrant and large crowd. So thank you for being here. My role at RBC is Director of Inclusion and Development, and that is part of a infrastructure around D&I within the organization. So we have an enterprise view around D&I for the company, and we help to set the strategy, the direction, but also help to enable D&I come to life within RBC. I find as though, from a personal perspective, being here, and I was mentioning to a couple of people just as we were getting started this morning, is that I feel as though D&I has always been part of my life just growing up. I've found that diversity and inclusion is everywhere I turn, whether it's been growing up, going through school, getting to work, and then through family, work, and society. So I feel as though when the opportunity came to actually work in the D&I space a few years ago within the company, I jumped at it. And so I've been with RBC for 20 years, and so D&I is also woven into everything that we do as well. So I found this is a natural fit, but also a great way for us to continue adding to diversity and inclusion, because it really is a journey. It's not a destination, and we'll hopefully get to that through our conversation today.
Some challenges with. So I want to thank our panel, and why don't we begin with a round of applause for our panel. this morning is establishing a of common language so that we all understand what we really mean when we're talking about things like diversity, equity, and so on. And as I was saying, yes, it is. So what we want to do is establish a glossary, as I said, for some of the terms so that we all know what we really mean when we're talking about some of these things. And so one of the reasons that I want to do this is that, I love a little bit of controversy. There was disagreement about what the term diversity actually means as we prepped for this session today. And what I'd also like to suggest is that while my panelists especially have experience and expertise, and none of us are the definitive words. So if any of you would like to weigh in on how these terms come to life inside of your organizations and the work that you do, please feel free to raise your hand and shout, and we'll add those to the definitions. So let's begin with the first one. And Jean-Pierre, you picked the wrong seat. I'm picking on you first. So let's begin with how would you define diversity?
I mean, I think diversity is a very commonly used term, and I think it has sort of many meanings to many people. I think in the spaces that we exist, diversity is really talking about difference, right? So what's unique within ourselves? How are we relating to each other? And I think Sarah helped contribute to this definition a little bit in our previous conversations, but looking at the difference between people, right, and our different identities and how those intersect. So diversity is really looking at difference at its core.
Mine's really working. I guess for me, as of, let's say, the last year or so, I've gotten a little bit tired with people sort of just throwing around the language of diversity inclusion writ large, playing it kind of fast and loose and not really knowing what they're talking about or having real understandings, which I think then translates to work that doesn't always meet the needs of what's going on. But for me, diversity is all about, it's an entirely relational thing. So candidates aren't diverse. I'm not diverse. I'm not that really unique, not that exciting. For me, it's all about a relational piece. So diversity is sort of the value that becomes a thing once you have a group of people. So diversity exists, say, in a team setting. So for me, it's about shifting from the individual. So we all know the quote unquote hiring for diversity or a diverse candidate. Right? That's become a problem. Right? There's a lot of issues that are coming as a result of this whole piece. So for me, it's relational or nothing at all.
That's great. Ali, what would you add to that?
Yeah, and again, I guess we're coming from different angles, but it's about respect and appreciation for that individual and where they are and who they are. So again, it comes from kind of just not, I don't want to say polar opposite to Sarah, but definitely we look at that individual, and that's when you start to appreciate the impact that an individual brings. So I think the recognition, it's that mix that you have to look at. But again, I don't think there's, to your point, a hard and fast real definition for it, but again, I think we're gravitating towards even making that shift as well to again, acknowledging where we are. So again, it's being used quite flippantly sometimes, but we need to make sure that when you do use it, it's being defined in a way that people can understand and appreciate where it's coming from.
Anyone in the audience have anything to add to that definition? So we've heard it's about difference. We've heard it's a relational term. It's about respect for an individual. Anyone have anything to add to that we think we've missed? No? Well, you got it. You've defined diversity. Let's talk about inclusion. And Ali, I'll pick on you first. How do you begin to define inclusion?
For me, like when personally, there was a question was asked a couple of years ago is, what does inclusion mean to you in 6 words or less? And to me, it was every voice matters, every voice counts. But when you look at inclusion in itself, it's putting the diversity part into action. So it's about creating that environment, creating the situation where people can bring their full potential and realize that full potential of what they're doing. So inclusion is really now about bringing everyone together. But it's that we say diversity is the mix. inclusion is that mix working together. So you need to be able to do that, and that's how it really puts it into action, because having diversity by itself is not enough anymore. Inclusion and advancing inclusion is where you need to be at least to get to aspire to.
Sarah, what would you add to that?
So I'm not even going to challenge you on that one. I will leave you right there.
Oh, okay, great. Jean-Pierre?
Yeah, I think I would 100% agree. I think it's, being invited to the party, right? Like it's being allowed to be welcomed into a space and be a part of that space and actively contribute to it. So, totally.
Okay, great. Let's talk about belonging. So, Jean-Pierre, I'll pick on you first. Belonging.
Yeah. Thanks. So yeah, belonging is really just about being able to feel like you, again, it's a part of inclusion, right? It's about being welcome in a space, being able to contribute to that space, feeling that you're valued in that space, right? Those are all sort of parts of belonging for me. Yeah.
Sarah?
I think so. Belonging is what I get the most excited about right now. So I think of it. So in the practice that we do, we think of it in terms of DIBS, so diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And to me, that's just a holistic approach that's sort of necessary to do this work well. So I think of diversity as the relational piece, right? So if you think of the example of a meeting, right? In the context of a meeting, it's about getting a group of folks around a table and being able to sort of value the differences that they bring in the context of that team. And then inclusion is, getting that mix, that team to work well together. And for me, belonging is sort of like inclusion 2.0, 3.0, whatever that might be. It's about like allowing or supporting people to actually be exactly who they need to be at that table. So it's not just about, having a seat at the table, which I think sometimes becomes a piece of the inclusion practice. But it's like, you're at that table. Can you, speak in the way that you want to speak? Can you speak confidently in your accented voice? Can you, bring out your curry and eat with your hands if, you're one of the only people who's maybe not from North America at that table? Or, will your colleagues, turn out the lights, turn down the noise, whatever it is, if you're someone who's on the autistic spectrum? Like, can you really be who you need to be in the most authentic way at that table? So not about hiding any aspects of yourself, but like bringing your full kind of authentic self to the table. That's to me what belonging really means. And it takes time to get there.
Ali.
So I'm going to agree with Sarah again.
Yeah.
And in the sense, again, belonging is exactly that. It's bringing your whole self to work. Like, you should never have to be in a situation where you check, even 1% of who you are at the door before you come into your workspace, because by that 1% not being there, you've actually given up an opportunity. But also on the other side of that, people that you're working with, whether it's your team, whether it's your company, whether it's vendors, whoever that is, they're missing out on that. So when you do check any part of yourself, and to Sarah's point, those cultural nuances, again, it's what happens in another part of the world, and you come here, it's different because things can be different, but if you, it's okay to be different and not necessarily have to adapt. And that's, again, there's a lot of conversation around, being able to integrate and adopt and all of those things, which are all great. But again, you should never be giving up part of yourself in that journey of becoming who you are and delivering what you're able to do.
That's great, thank you. So wrapping this section up, I want to talk about two terms, one of which I concede I thought I had a handle on, equity, and another intersectionality that I'd never heard of before. So Sarah, I'm going to begin with you and hopefully define equity and what it means in the context of DIB, which again, is a term I've heard for the first time today.
Yeah. Do you want to start with this one?
Okay. Okay. Jean-Pierre?
Yeah. Okay. I sort of define equity in relation to equality. That's sort of the way I look at it. I think equality is really about everyone starts from the same starting point, right? We are all perceived to have the same skill sets. We're all equal. We're all at the same starting point. Equity to me is really recognizing that we're not all the same. We don't all have the same access to resources and supports. We're not all coming from the same starting point. And so equity helps level that playing ground a little bit so that we're all able to sort of have the same opportunity for success. That's what equity is for me.
I'm just going to add, definitely to that. And then it's, about the individual. So it's making equality is giving everybody the same, and obviously equity is that somebody might need something different from the other. And again, if you go online and you type in equality versus equity, you'll see this cartoon of the three individuals looking at the baseball game, right? And so the equality is, everyone's got the two buckets, the two crates to stand on, but only, a few of them can actually see the game. And equality is that, the person that was the shortest could not see the game. They actually needed the three crates to be able to look over the fence and see. And so that's a perfect, I think it just sums up so beautifully to say that, everybody is different. And again, those tools required by that person are going to be different from the other one. So it's not just, again, painting everyone with the same, or even giving everybody the same, because that doesn't help.
Certainly not least is intersectionality. So I'd never heard this term. Who would like to begin and define sort of the context of this for the rest of our conversation?
So for me, it's, if you come to this work and you're only bringing sort of one lens to it, gender or race or whatever it may be, that's just wholly insufficient, right? So for me, my feminism, my approach to this work is intersectional or kind of nothing at all. And some folks forget about that. So, in the Toronto landscape, most often the last year or so, we've seen a lot of work around, women in tech, women in leadership, women's empowerment sort of writ large. But for the most part, that work is just, it lacks a wholly intersectional lens, right? We're only talking about one aspect of sort of one dimension of our diversity. But we're all so much more than any box that we can check, right? We're a lot of different boxes, plus all of these intangible pieces in between, right? All of that sort of gray space. So I can't extract, different aspects of my identity when I come to a table, right? I'm more than just a woman, although I end up on panels because I'm a woman, or do interviews because of this one tiny piece of my identity, and that's just not sufficient, right? So my queerness, my experience with sexual violence, all of these different pieces are what I bring to the table. So it's about sort of understanding the complexity and the fascinating ways that this all, comes out in one person.
I think just to add to that, I think I 100% agree. I think it's about acknowledging that we have various components to who we are, our beings. Like I'm queer, South Asian, newcomer, cisgendered, able-bodied. Like those are all components of, or many of the components of who I am. And it's looking at how those interact with each other in the way that I experience the world and perceive the world, and the way the world experiences and perceives me. So understanding that those things interact in very different ways for each person.
Yeah, and they both summed it up great, which is great. And it is entirely about, again, when we talk about diversity of the mix, each one of us individually has that mix. Again, we're all compounded with different elements and all those different things coming together. So again, that intersectionality comes both in a positive and can be in a negative too, right? Because you experience it in both ways. So how you are, but then also then how the world interacts with you, to Jean-Pierre's point as well.
Okay, covered the glossary, hopefully, and hopefully you can hear me a little bit. So now we'd like to begin with establishing some themes so that we can all activate and then measure the diversity programs in our organization. I want to begin with Sarah and talking about why diversity specifically matters. I think that diversity, you already, is one of those terms that's co-opted and misunderstood as a result. And to me, it's like employee engagement or culture. And I think there can be a tendency for diversity to be considered, speaking of boxes, I need one of each. And we're not building an arc here. So curious about, what does your research and the work that you do demonstrate about the impact that diversity can have on something like innovation or the performance of a business? Can we talk about diversity from that perspective?
Yeah, so I think, as I said before, I sort of originally came to this work, as sort of like a social justice baby. But then I realized that, I needed to get into the research and the data to really be able to support my arguments, to open sort of hearts and minds of largely the folks who are in power and need to be hearing these conversations. And sometimes they only listen if you're talking about numbers or data or whatever it may be. So when I put on that business case hat, for me, what I spent a lot of time in my sort of PhD thinking through is, we know the innovation economy has arrived, right? Tech is developing harder and faster in more ways than we've ever seen before. And we know that, sort of the knowledge production economy is at warp speed as well. And then at the same time, we know that homogenous communities, countries, societies are on like wholly on a decline, right? So the demographic makeup of our world is shifting hard and fast too, right? So cognitive, cultural, and demographic diversity is more complex and becoming even more complex, day by day, and that's not stopping anytime soon. So that means in my head that we're living in one of the most kind of complex times we've ever seen, and so this requires people to have so many hearts and minds and lived experiences around any given table to make really good decisions in a complex environment. So if folks are not making sure that the composition of their team really is representative of whoever they're trying to sell to, or the world sort of at a whole, then you're going to have gaps and blind spots in what you do. And we see this in industries, and this has been happening for years, right? The automotive industry is a great example. From coming out of wartime, men were sort of the ones driving vehicles at the time. So car crash safety testing was predominantly done using male body crash test dummies. But if we fast forward to today, a lot of different folks drive cars, right? Different shapes and sizes of bodies, pregnant bodies, etc. Yet we haven't sort of modified how we're doing that crash test safety testing, right? So we know that if someone is pregnant and they're in a car crash, the likelihood of them losing their fetus is really high. And this is largely just because of sort of a gap or blind spot in the industry that just hasn't been corrected. And to me, that's just, that's deep bias kind of run amok. And we see the same thing, in companies that we love, like Snapchat is a great example, right? Just a year ago, I think the top of last year, they had sort of a Bob Marley filter that was released to users, right? So user selfies were, turning them into Bob Marley. And then they had other filters that were turning user selfies into agent caricatures. And that's largely because their dev team was based in Ukraine, and they didn't have sort of folks vetting out the process to make sure that the filters that they were releasing were what people needed and wanted, right? So that was just sort of another gap. Like it's a simple gap, but they sort of isolated a lot of their user base, and rightfully so, right? So for me, any company that's not kind of considering diversity writ large, at the core of what they do, like as a 360 piece, they're going to fail. They're going to fail hard and they're going to fail fast. It's just a matter of when and how big the fuck up will be.
All right, there you are. I'm mindful of our time, so what I want to talk to now is Ali a little bit about your job title and your bio is really interesting to me. And it seems like there's a breadth of programs that you are involved in. So for those of us that are looking at different ways to activate diversity and inclusion initiatives inside of the organization, how do we look at it beyond the lens of this is a people issue? What are some of the different ways that we can begin to activate programs?
Yeah, no, definitely. And, that is part of the role and the group that we're part of. So, from us, on our perspective, D&I has been in the organization for, a great number of years. But, what really then helps to solidify is that everybody's asking the question, like, so what can we do? What should we do? So back in 2009, the organization created a diversity and inclusion blueprint, which really acts as a North Star for not only employees, but also then to clients and to the community at large. And what that helps to do is then show and provide that roadmap as to where the organization is going from a D&I perspective. Now, whilst businesses in the organization will have also their own nuances and specific areas that they want to target, holistically, everybody knows where we're moving towards. It's really directing the ship. And so, when we look at our D&I blueprint today, it's now in its third iteration. And so, some of my work has been geared around building that blueprint with our team and also then consulting our businesses and our leaders to say, what is the direction that we want to take? So From 2009, there was like 2 iterations of the blueprint. Our blueprint today is, geared towards what we want to aspire towards for the year 2020. And so, we've made out commitments. And again, within those commitments, you'll see pillars that are around talent, clients, and community. So again, very much, again, looking to see that holistic change or that opportunity that arises is both from an internal perspective. So what are we doing for our employees, our people who make that change? What do we do for our clients? Again, part of our value and vision is also D&I is included into that. So when it's in your DNA from a values perspective, then people look to see what can you deliver, and then clients are also looking to see, what does that organization or company stand for, and what can I do? Can I relate to them? Am I seeing that reflection, that diversity that I would want to see? Do I want to do business with them? And then from a community aspect, again, it's around what do we as an organization from a social impact and responsibility perspective can we bring to the table? Because again, we live and work in the same neighborhoods as everybody else, and so we want to be able to contribute to the betterment of that place where we live. And so collectively, when you look at the 3 pillars coming together, this is where we strive towards. So that's some of the work that we look to do. And again, that's where really when you look to see is where the impact can be, because when your employees and your clients and the community at large all come and sort of move together, and when you put out the umbrella around thought leadership and active champions around diversity, then you start to look to see making that change. It's about change. And to Sarah's point too, is around innovation, because if you're going to be successful in anything you're going to do, you're going to have to innovate. And so innovation can only come when you have those diverse thoughts, those opinions, and those opportunities to bring yourself to work and be able to do that.
Great opportunity to bring Jean-Pierre back into the conversation, because one of the things you talked about impact. One of the things that struck me in our initial conversation were the task forces that are available or running at Ryerson. And I'm very interested in the notion of transitioning communities of interest to communities of practice. So maybe, it's one thing to start something, it's another thing to continue it, to build a program, to measure the impact. Can you talk about the task forces and how they actually come to life to do things at Ryerson?
Yeah, so I think, from Ali's point as well, I think what's clear that allows this work to happen, number one, is acknowledgement that this is important, this is valuable, and this comes down from the top, right? So leadership has to have buy-in. Without that, I think the work becomes incredibly difficult to do. It's already difficult work, but this is especially more challenging without the leadership buy-in. So that's the first piece. I think for us, what we were doing is just sort of, there's a lot of passion on our team about this work, acknowledging that, Ryerson's one of the most diverse campuses in Canada. Our students have a lot of needs, and we're hearing about those needs, through our one-to-one interactions with students, right? We have students who are saying they walk into workspaces and they don't feel that they're welcome, or they don't feel that their identity is as acknowledged or respected. So we try to look at those things and think about how does that impact the work that we're doing. And so really, last year or yearly rather, we send out surveys to the students and we ask them about how they have used our services, if they've used our services. Last year, we also included a diversity ID survey. So students got to self-identify if they belong to a particular equity-seeking group. And so what we noticed with that was that there was some gaps. We noticed that there were certain communities that were maybe not accessing our services. And so, some colleagues and I decided to sit down and talk about what that really meant for us, right? And so what we realized is a task force would be really helpful in helping to sort of combat that. So now this task force exists. Our leadership is very much on board, but it's hosted and run by my peers, my colleagues. Our leadership does not necessarily have their hands in the work that we're doing because it's running from the ground up. And what we're looking to do is really assess the services that we're offering, look at how those services are excluding or including particular groups of people. And then when we identify those gaps, looking at how we can connect with community partners both on and off campus to help fill those gaps, right? And I think a part of that as well is acknowledging that our students are the experts as well. So as we're identifying those gaps, looking to draw on their skill sets, on their experiences to help us be better at what we're doing so that we're supporting them in the best way possible.
Great, thank you. So this morning we've established common language. We've talked about why diversity and inclusion are not warm fuzzies. I'll take someone. Oh, who knows what, maybe I just need to stand and walk around a little bit. We've talked about how diversity and inclusion is not a warm fuzzy, that it has a big impact in terms of innovation. We've talked about diversity not being limited to just the people lens, but also touching, the communities we live and work in, the customers we support. We've also talked about the impact of actually doing things and ongoing feedback and identifying gaps. So with that foundation, now let's talk about, maybe I'm interested in beginning to build programs or start something inside of my own organization. I guess a question for the entire panel is, how do I properly balance the needs of individuals, of teams, of collectives, to make sure that that first step I take is a right one? So anyone who wants to weigh in to begin.
No, start off. I think again, when we look at achieving that balance, it is looking, at all those levels, but also looking to see, ultimately, for diversity and inclusion to be successful, it definitely starts, to Jean-Pierre's point, from the top, from your leadership. So again, there has to be buy-in from the top, but also acknowledgement that, again, this is something that we're going to do. We're also going to then look to see how does that impact. And so then when you start to look to do, is to see the impact of what it has from a team perspective and ultimately individual. And really individual and team is really critical in the whole landscape, because ultimately, the results and the drive that comes is usually within that cohort, right? So again, if the individual does not feel inclusive, does not feel respected or part of that collective, then obviously, again, as we talked about at the beginning, you don't bring your whole self, you're losing out. That next best idea could have just walked out the door because, there was no inclusion there. And then again, with the team to be productive as well, and they're striving to come up with new ideas, new products, new services, new ways of doing things. Again, to Sarah's points and comments around the world that we live in now is, it's about innovation. We have to, actually a colleague that I just met for the first time in the back, we were talking and said, two types of companies in the future, right? You're either going to be innovative and succeed, or you're going to be dead, right? And so it's harsh realization. Thanks, Andrew, for that. But that's where we are. Like, if you're not going to do that, so that buy-in has to be collective, but definitely, from the leadership, it has to emulate. And then you start to see, like, again, building the foundations, like building a house. It has to have all those other components. Again, talking about diversity inclusion is just one thing. How is that going to come to life? What does that look like? Is there a governance? Is there a structure to it? How do you report on that? So again, measuring success, and like you talked about the ROI in business, like, are people walking out the door because they're not seeing that this is an environment I want to work with? So then you have to build those components, and it really is then you have the foundation, and then you start building your house. And so those things, and then the ideas, then the initiatives that come from that, then you start to look to see, again, does it have those components, and then having the voices at the table to make that come to life.
Sarah, anything you'd add to that?
Not a lot, actually. I think for me, it's always a struggle to balance sort of the individual versus the collective. So there isn't like one clear, clean answer to this by any stretch. But I think it definitely goes to, and this speaks to your work with RBC and the blueprint piece, making sure that everyone actually understands where you want to go. Don't just do this work uncritically because you're like, oh shit, we need to do D&I stuff because, our CEO, he's going to be in hot water if he doesn't. That doesn't get you anywhere, right? You have to be deliberate and intentional and design a holistic strategy that everyone understands and is clear on sort of where you're trying to go. Maybe, gender parity is one aspect of it. That's what a lot of folks go towards. I don't even know if parity is the answer, probably not. It's just whatever it may be, it's being clear on where you're trying to move towards. And then for me, it's like everyone talks about how, buy-in from the top for sure is necessary, and I don't dispute that by any stretch. But for me, it's some sort of fine balance of buy-in from the top, the collective sort of grassroots groundswell within an org, whether that's supported by ERGs or much more. And then it's also about speaking to that sort of average, kind of maybe apathetic person, in the middle of your organization, right? You need that supportive spine to sort of connect, from the leadership at the top and that collective groundswell. So for me, it's like you need to figure out how to sort of intervene at each level kind of simultaneously. So that's why we need people like you and your roles with huge teams, right? It's never enough to just have like a quote unquote diversity champion within an org. This is really hard work that takes a lot of time. So
Just a footnote. I wish we had a huge team. There's only 4 of us. We're tiny but mighty. So
Jean-Pierre, anything you'd add there?
Yeah. I think for me, I think when we're looking at this type of work, I think we have to acknowledge that often benefiting the individual benefits the collective, right? So I think when we look at things like accessibility, that is not servicing one person or one segment of the population. It services us all, right? Like if you look at who has an iPhone? Like I have an iPhone, right? Siri is an accessibility tool, but yet many of us use it, right? And so acknowledging that when we put these, policies and practices in place, we're not serving one population, we're serving us all, and it's all for our, collective benefit.
It seems like so many of the members of this community are at, they have 50 employees, they're going to be 100 employees by the end of the year. They have money, and they're spending most of their time recruiting. And when we talk about recruiting, one of the things that I hear every single day is about removing bias from the recruiting process. So let's spend just a little bit of time talking about bias from 2 perspectives. First of all, what are some of the ways that we can actually confront bias in the recruiting process?
I'll start. Bias, everybody has it. So I think that's the first thing, right? Put your hand up and acknowledge that everybody has a bias. Like nobody can ever say there is no bias. And so when it comes to recruiting, again, you have to look at those different layers. So there's a conversation that the recruiter needs to have with the hiring manager for a position. Again, however your infrastructure is set up, is that I need to fill this role. Well, that's okay. So let's first of all look at that role. Are there any biases coming out just from that staffing, like on that mandate that you've posted? And then you start to look to say from a recruiting perspective, again, what are those biases? Have I acknowledged them? And then you start to tackle to other areas around getting a diverse slate of clients and candidates to apply for that role. The interview process in itself, again, is it one-on-one? Is it a panel? Because again, when you have more than one person interviewing, you're going to get, and I guarantee, well, I won't say guarantee, but I would highly suggest that, with 3 people interviewing one person, there are going to be 3 different points of view on what that individual that they interviewed came through with. So again, having those diverse voices and acknowledging is first thing, but then making sure that you're continuously checking your own biases throughout that process. So from a recruitment perspective, that's that one. And again, it's having again, sending out your teams. So even the recruiting teams themselves, is that diverse? Are they acknowledging? So are you going out to organizations, institutions, and looking for, again, diverse talent coming through? So is there a reflection of that? So there's lots of, again, ways to make sure that you're continuously checking the bias, but it's also then looking to see that, going out to campuses and schools and other trade fairs and job fairs, again, connecting with all those different elements gives you that diversity and hopefully helps to uncover those unconscious biases. So again, it's a continuous role check. And then again, those of you that have experienced unconscious bias and they've gone through the training, you start to then take that into actually your everyday life, because in everything and everyone that you have interaction with, it's like, was I just experiencing unconscious bias there? Like, did I have a bias walking into that conversation? So again, it's just the acknowledgement in itself is the biggest piece.
The second part of my question, which is about, what do you do? How do you correct it if you think that as an individual, you are on the receiving end of it?
We talked a bit about this before this. I mean, I struggle with that question because I think, as an individual, as someone who's experiencing bias, is it really your duty to correct it, right? Like, if I don't feel like I have the power, if I'm already experiencing some form of oppression or I feel like I'm marginalized, where do I get the power to then challenge that with whoever I'm interviewing with or with leadership, whatever that might look like, right? So, I mean, when you're talking about changing it or challenging it, I mean, there has to be a very safe space, and I question how many workspaces are that safe that you can challenge the bias. So I don't know that there's a hard and fast answer to that.
And I agree. I think it's, as an individual, it's tough to put yourself into that situation to challenge because, again, what you perceive as a bias, the other person may not have, right? But again, training, education, awareness um, are all tools that we need to arm ourselves as an individual with. So you need to go out. And it could be just to say that, you know what, and it's maybe not tactfully to say, well, I think you're being biased towards me, but it's like having a little bit of a dialogue to say and try and uncover, like, where or what some of those changes that you felt were coming towards you. Like, is that justified? Is it just a point of view? Um, you kind of, explicitly say, well, you know what? Here's the link. You need to go do this implicit test and figure yourself out because there's some bias coming towards me. But I think again, it is risky to be, put yourself out there, especially if you're experiencing it. But having some, at least trying to bridge a conversation is the first part. But again, sometimes it may just be that you, and again, depending on where it happens, right? Again, if it's within the company or organization, there are again mechanisms hopefully in place for people to be able to share that or go to someone and have a conversation to help intervene. But it's a difficult one to navigate and not one that, again, even more so complicated if you're on the outside looking into somewhere because you really then, to Jean-Pierre's point, have to figure out what's that mechanism to make it safe for me to have that voice. And then have I actually then put my head up, above the trees there and potentially then putting myself up into other things as well.
10 minutes left, so mindful of our time, I selfishly, there are two sort of areas that I want to talk about. First of all, as we think about diversity and inclusion initiatives inside the organization, when we think about as an organization establishing conditions to make sure that we remove bias wherever possible and so on, how do we make sure that from the beginning these initiatives are business focused? Because many of us have challenges getting our programs funded or approved. So I think often if you can begin with a business lens, you're ahead of the game. How do we begin in that way? You want Sarah?
Well, I think for me, this really goes back to sort of the piece around the innovation economy, and this is like a do or die. So I don't love using the business case, but I do understand that you need to meet people where they are at certain times because everyone's at a different point on their learning journey. So part of being in this space is knowing when to bring out the research and data or when to sort of tug on that emotive, like heartstring piece, whatever it may be. So I guess it's just about really, for me, it is meeting people where they are. So bring them whatever argument, whatever case they need, whether you need to frame it through their daughter, something that's really personal, or you need to show them literal bottom line numbers. I like to talk about diversity a lot through the lens of diversity debt, so likening it through sort of like financial speak, and I find that to be a really effective way, especially of getting CFOs to sort of hear and meet me where I need them to meet me because numbers are the game. So that's been an effective strategy for me to date.
And I'd add to that, again, there is great research out there that you can go and look. McKinsey has done some work, extensive work. Deloitte last year produced their Global Human Trends, which diversity inclusion, made the top 10. And so you can see the business cases from a very broad, holistic level as to the impact that it has to organizations. Again, top companies that are outperforming their peers, it's because diversity inclusion is embedded into what they do. So it is around diverse candidates. It is around those innovative teams. Diversity of thought is, driving that innovation in that company. So again, you can look for the broader research around to show you why diversity inclusion makes sense, the impact that it can have to your business. But then you start to look to see again when you have for every company, it's looking at attrition. Looking to see what even that's one aspect, but then employee morale as well. So again, what is the employee feeling? Again, if they do not feel that they belong or they have the voice, they have the space to be that innovation, drive to make a difference and to bring that whole self to work and contribute. Like obviously, businesses have goals and objectives, and in order to meet those. But again, it's built upon the building blocks of the individual coming to the team and then to the collective of the good. So again, the business case is there. You can define it in any kind of different parameters as how you want to. Funding, yes, you're competing against everybody else that wants, a piece of the pie. But again, it's the nice thing, well, I think the fantastic thing about diversity and inclusion is it does impact everyone. So again, from our example, all of our lines of business have D&I intricately weaved into everything they do. You don't necessarily have to call it out, but it's, again, for them to be successful, they get it. So now, how do we make this successful? Because that will translate to then whatever your business objectives are.
Great. So my final question, a final word, this is a question that came from one of the registrants, and it's something that I think about all the time, which is, regardless of the topic, whether it's workplace harassment, whether it's culture, how do we move past any of these as one-offs? Like, how do we move past, and this is, I should have probably left more time than 5 minutes because it's the toughest question, but, how do we make sure that we just haven't done the training and ticked that box and said, we're good on diversity and inclusion now? How do we make sure that as we, move forward, this becomes, to your point, part of the blueprint, part of the DNA, just the way that a business operates? So it's a tough question, but I want to sort of leave that as a final thought for the group.
Well, I will say, and I alluded to this at the beginning when I started, is that it's a journey. It's not a destination. You're never, if your end goal is to get to the destination, then you have to check yourself with a number of issues that you're going to get to, because diversity and inclusion is definitely a journey, and we are always aspiring to be better. So whether it's a commitment, it's a benchmark, or it's a goal, you're going to strive to get there. But once you've got there, then it's the next thing, and that also then ties back to being successful. Because if you're here today, and again, things like, again, living examples in front of us, Blockbuster, Netflix, like these are all just like, examples in front of us every day. The evolution of the cell phone, all of these things have happened, innovation, growth, have come about because people have been striving towards the next best thing. So being static and the status quo is never going to be an option to be successful. So diversity and inclusion, again, it does need to be weaved into the DNA of your organization. It does take time, so it's not an overnight phenomenal of success. It's like taking the steps is the first part, but building upon them. Again, it is somewhat to building the ark. You do need to build it, but it's going to take, again, how far and quickly you ramp up is up to you as a company, resources. But again, building the culture, building the mindset, and then everybody, again, does want to strive to be the best that they can be individually, as a team and as an organization. And then ultimately, again, it goes back to, like, I think that we are part of the broader collective of society. So in us to be successful, D&I, like, again, I mentioned as well, is that for me, it's been woven into everything I do as part of my life. So D&I is actually, you're living it and breathing it. Everybody is to some form. So just continue. And if people are not around you, are not hearing that message or not getting that message, then again, we live in an age where resources and tools are, easily available. So education is the next part to that as well. It's to build and continue learning.
Sarah, final word from you.
So in my view, like, this is sort of social justice work that's become embedded within corporate worlds, right? So this is really hard work. You need to manage your expectations from the get-go that you're not going to, like, get to your end goal, whatever it may be, in 6 months, right? This is, it's a living, breathing, fluid process. And because of, we're all humans and we're complex, there isn't necessarily ever going to be an end point. And I think for me, it's the way to, like, sort of ensure that it sort of stays as part of the DNA of a business is figuring out some sort of balance between your quantitative measurement piece and your qualitative side of things. So using so many of these awesome tools that are available, right? Like Forte has the DIBS app, the diversity survey, the diversity, inclusion, and belonging survey, right? It's a free offering for all Canadian tech. Well, that's a good place to jump in. It's free, get your baseline. But then make sure that you're balancing that out with the quantitative side of things, right? What's beyond those boxes that that you kind of hit on in a survey? How are people, like, really feeling? Where's the humanness, right? So for me, it has to be the balance of the two. Otherwise, it's sort of insufficient, right? Data and research only really speaks to our heads, our intellect, but the kind of the other stuff, the gray stuff, speaks to like our emotions, the emotive pieces of us, which are sort of half of this work at any given time. So striking that balance and figuring out sort of what works for you and your organization.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think the connection piece is really important. I think something that the word that keeps coming to mind is authenticity, right? So doing it as authentically as possible. It's one thing to have commitment from leadership, but then how do you translate that into, down to your staff? And it's really about having it, come from the ground up. Having your staff tell you what is needed, what's happening, what's not working, and letting that be the driver for what you do next. And also recognizing it starts small, right? It doesn't have to be big policy changes right away. It can be something small. Like we did a panel where we brought in some of our employer partners that are supporting the LGBT community, and Pepsi came in and talked about how they just had their senior leadership teams sign these contracts saying that they were going to be allies to LGBT communities, and that's a really sort of very demonstrative piece that made LGBT colleagues feel very comfortable, right? And that's something very small that can be done. And looking at those little things that can be done to start the process so that it feels authentic and it feels genuine, and then looking at those bigger pieces as they come across.
With that, we're exactly 1 minute over time. That's your fault, Jean-Pierre.
I'm so sorry.
Let's thank. So I think we have a few minutes maybe to entertain some additional questions, and if not, we're happy to do it through networking. Are there any questions for Jean-Pierre, for Sarah, for Ali? Yeah.
Hello, my name's Julie. I'm just curious for the panel, or I guess anybody else in the audience, if they've used any AI tools in their recruitment process or strategy. I think that my worry with these tools is they're only so good as the people who make them, and as the panel has established, we are only human, and hopefully we know that we do have some biases, when we're creating things or when we're interviewing. So, yeah, just curious on your thoughts on that.
Bowden?
Okay, I'm really happy you asked that question. So I'm a CTO of a company called Forte.ai. It is a bottoms-up approach for eliminating unconscious bias through the recruiting process. It's very different from every other tool on the market. It is not focused on persona analysis. It actually trains itself on your existing team in terms of core values and beliefs. It uses that to, one, determine internal cultural correlations within your team, as well as to assess candidates. It has demonstrably improved diversity and on any shape, way, or form. And it's actually based on the work of Google and Project Aristotle and Oxygen, where they found out the hard way that team effectiveness is completely unrelated to the who side of the equation.
Another question. Oh, see.
Thanks for the question. I'll say that customization is great, but to your point, is it doable and sustainable? But so having maybe the broader checklist to begin with, I think is a great place, because at least then you've got a core list, or at least a baseline to work from. And then as the individual comes through, then you can look to see the nuances. But I think just having a broader list, because if you do try and customize, then depending on the number of people you're going to see, you'll have some great research for probably Sarah will take from you based on the database that you're going to build. But is it sustainable and doable? Because if you want to replicate that, so I think one of the things we're doing with our recruitment teams is to provide a guidebook around some general guidelines to have conversations with the hiring manager, check some of their own unconscious biases going into that interview process. Panels, again, are a great way of deflecting and mitigating bias, because again, it doesn't necessarily have to be, you do want parity in that panel, so that you have the diverse opinions coming through. But again, it's just doing those things and then making that as kind of the standard will then hopefully give you opportunities to then dig a bit deeper as well.
Can I just add to that?
Yes.
So yes, I think those things are all great as well. I think as well, making sure you have a clear understanding of what you're looking for. So having rubrics to measure success and changing the way you measure success in interviews, right? So at Ryerson, we do carousels where, you do a standard interview, but then you also do things like you work on a problem, or you work on a particular program. And so a group will come in, they're a part of the interview, and they're working on a particular project, and there's a few observers that are using a rubric to measure their success as they're engaging with each other, right? So I think looking at different ways of just sort of acknowledging someone's fit for a role is probably a good approach as well.
I am going to give the last word there to Jean-Pierre. We're a little bit over our time, so please, our panelists,